Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into The Power of Your Supermind by Vernon Howard.
This book,
Yeah, this one really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It's all about, you shared it.
well, it's about this idea
Yeah,
that we all have this power within us, this supermind, as Howard calls it. And this deep dive is all about, figuring out how to tap into that, how to make it work for us in practical ways.
right. And what I think is so interesting about Howard's approach, at least from what I've read so far, is that he doesn't present this supermind as some kind of mystical, out there concept.
Right.
It's more like a practical tool
Right.
for dealing with, everyday life.
Yeah, and for achieving genuine happiness, not just, temporary happiness, real lasting happiness.
Right. He's not talking about, levitating or reading minds or anything like that.
No.
It's more about, like, rewiring your thinking
Yes.
to tap into this, like, inner strength.
To achieve practical things. He doesn't even talk about, material wealth, really.
Right.
It's more about, inner peace and freedom.
Yeah, and I think one of the things he emphasizes right from the beginning is, like, this idea that we live in two worlds, right?
Yeah. He calls it the external world, the
Yeah.
external world of events
Yeah.
and circumstances, and then the inner world, which is really what's driving our experience.
Right. So it's not about, like, controlling what happens to us out there in the world.
No.
It's more about how we react to it.
Yes, mastering our reactions.
Yeah.
And that's where the supermind comes in. He actually compares it to two different communities. One community is, constantly trying to manipulate
Right.
the outer world to fit their desires. And the other community is more focused on cultivating their inner world.
And I'm guessing the inner world folks are the ones who find that true happiness.
That's exactly right. Howard really emphasizes the importance of this inner world and understanding how it affects our experience.
And he talks a lot about this concept of, like, receptivity. What exactly does he mean by that?
Well, he argues that a lot of us, most of us really, are just kind of living on autopilot. We're trapped by our conditioning and these preconceived notions about the world. And so receptivity for him is about actively challenging those assumptions. It's about being open to new ways of seeing things.
So it's almost like being willing to question everything you think you know.
Yes. And being willing to admit that you might be wrong.
Right.
He has this really interesting analogy about eagles who trade their freedom for easy corn.
Okay, the eagles and the corn. Tell me more about that.
So there's this group of eagles, right? They're used to soaring high in the sky, hunting for their food. They're, strong, independent creatures. But then these clever crows come along and they start offering the eagles corn.
Like free corn.
Yeah, easy corn, no effort required. And at first, the eagles are like, why not? It's a simple meal, right? But as they start eating the corn, they start to they get lazy. They get fat. They forget how to hunt.
They're so focused on the corn that they forget how to fly.
Exactly. They become dependent on the crows for their survival.
So the corn, in this analogy, is kind of like those things that we cling to in life.
Yes.
Comfort, security, maybe even relationships sometimes.
It could be beliefs,
Beliefs, yeah.
dogmas, anything that we think is essential for our happiness.
I might actually be holding us back
Yes.
from, like, reaching our full potential.
And that's what Howard's getting at with this whole supermind concept.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what corn are we settling for in our own lives? What
Yeah.
are we clinging to that might actually be preventing us from soaring?
It's a great question to ask yourself. What are you dependent on? What are you afraid to let go of?
And that brings us to another key concept, the false self. I know Howard talks a lot about this idea of the false self versus the true self. What exactly is he getting at there?
Well, the false self, as he describes it, is this collection of egotistical desires, anxieties, limiting beliefs, all the stuff that we think makes up who we are, but it's not really who we are.
Like the mask we wear.
Exactly. It's like a mask we wear to protect ourselves, to fit in, to get what we want. But the problem is it also blocks us from experiencing true happiness.
And from accessing the power of the supermind.
Exactly.
So how do we start to dissolve this false self and tap into that deeper power?
Well, first we have to be willing to see it.
Right, to recognize it.
We have to be honest with ourselves about the ways in which we're holding ourselves back. And that can be painful. It can be uncomfortable.
He says, the most tragic deception is self-deception. That one really resonated with me.
It's powerful, right? Because he's basically saying that we're often our own worst enemies. We lie to ourselves, we make excuses, we avoid facing the truth.
So how do we stop doing that? How do we stop lying to ourselves and start living more authentically?
Well, it starts with being willing to face our pain.
That doesn't sound very fun.
I know it's not always easy, but Howard argues that it's essential for growth. He doesn't mean wallowing in negativity, though. It's about facing our pain with, like, calm insight.
So it's not about ignoring our pain or trying to pretend it doesn't exist.
No, it's about understanding the root of our pain. What are the beliefs, the patterns, the fears that are causing us to suffer?
He uses this great analogy of a man who's fixated on potatoes.
Right, he's convinced that potatoes are the only food that can sustain him.
He's like obsessed with potatoes.
He won't eat anything else. And so he spends all his time and energy searching for potatoes, worrying about running out of potatoes, hoarding potatoes.
And he's miserable, even though there are plenty of other delicious and nutritious foods available to him.
Exactly. And Howard uses this analogy to show how we can be like that with our own beliefs and desires. We get so fixated on certain things, thinking they're essential for our happiness, that we miss out on all the other good stuff that life has to offer.
So we're clinging to our potatoes, even though they might actually be making us sick. So how do we break free from those potatoes? How do we shift our focus from those things that we're clinging to something more nourishing, more fulfilling?
That's where the turning point comes in.
A turning point.
Yeah, it's that moment when we decide to prioritize our inner world. It's when we make a conscious choice to cultivate our supermind.
So it's a decision. It's not something that just happens to us.
Exactly. We have to choose it.
But how do we actually make that choice? What does it look like in practice?
Well, it starts with asking ourselves some hard questions. What do we truly value? What's really important to us? And then we have to start making choices that are aligned with those values.
It's about living more intentionally.
Yes, it's about taking a step back and reevaluating our priorities. Are we living in a way that's truly aligned with who we are? Or are we just going through the motions, chasing after things that don't really matter?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that this process isn't always easy.
No, it's not. It can be challenging.
It can be really uncomfortable.
Howard actually compares it to walking a road in darkness. You can't see where you're going. It's scary, it's uncertain, but you keep moving forward anyway.
Because you trust that there's something better waiting for you at the end of the road.
Exactly.
So even when we feel lost or uncertain, it's important to trust the process.
Yes. Trust the process and keep moving forward.
But how do we actually navigate that darkness?
Yeah.
How do we find our way when we can't see clearly?
Well, Howard offers some very specific techniques. One of the most powerful ones is facing our fears head on.
That sounds terrifying.
I know, but he argues that fear thrives in the shadows. It's when we try to avoid our fears, when we push them down, that they have the most power over us. But when we bring them into the light of awareness, when we confront them directly, they often lose their grip.
It's like that saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Exactly.
So he's saying that we shouldn't run away from our fears, we should run towards them.
In a sense, yes. Because when we confront our fears, we often discover that they were never as formidable as we imagined.
We build courage and resilience in the process.
Exactly.
So facing our fears is one technique. What are some others that Howard recommends?
Well, he talks a lot about the power of supermind in decision-making.
Okay, so how does supermind influence our decisions?
Well, he suggests that when we're operating from our supermind, we don't get bogged down by fear or desire.
We're not driven by those lower impulses.
Right. Instead, we trust the natural flow of life. We make decisions from a place of clarity and inner knowing.
He compares it to being in a boat on a river.
Yes. Instead of trying to control the boat's every movement, we relax and trust the current, knowing that we're ultimately headed in the right direction.
So it's about surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
In a way, yes. It's about recognizing that we're not in control of everything, and that's okay.
It's about letting go of that need for control.
Exactly. And he encourages us to embrace the idea of living to please ourselves.
That sounds a little selfish.
Well, he doesn't mean it in a selfish or egotistical way. He's talking about making choices that are aligned with our true nature, rather than seeking external validation or trying to live up to other people's expectations.
So it's about understanding what truly brings us joy and fulfillment, and then having the courage to live in a way that honors those values.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a walled garden, suggesting that true beauty and happiness are found within, but accessing them requires effort and a willingness to let go of anything that weighs us down.
Anything that's preventing us from entering that garden.
Exactly. And he reminds us that this process of letting go can be challenging. It might mean disappointing others or facing disapproval, but he assures us that it's worth it. He says, anything you get from another human being that requires a sacrifice of your integrity is not worth getting,
It's a powerful reminder to stay true to ourselves,
even when it's hard.
even when it's hard. And he also emphasizes that no one can truly hurt us unless we give them the power to do so.
He has this great line, no one can possibly hurt you.
It's a powerful idea, right?
It is. It's about recognizing that our emotional well-being ultimately depends on our own inner state, not on the actions or opinions of others.
So we have more control over our happiness than we realize.
Exactly. And he encourages us to step into that power, to recognize that true freedom comes from within.
I love that. That's such an empowering message.
It is. It's about taking responsibility for our own happiness.
So we've talked about facing our fears, making decisions from a place of supermind awareness, and living to please ourselves. What are some other practical techniques that Howard suggests for cultivating our supermind?
Well, he emphasizes the power of silence.
Silence.
Yes. Quieting the mind, spending time in stillness.
You know, I think that's something a lot of people struggle with these days.
I agree. We're so used to constant stimulation, our phones, the news, social media. It's like we're afraid to be alone with our own thoughts.
But Howard argues that it's in those moments of silence, when we quiet the noise of the world and the chatter of our own minds, that we can truly connect with the wisdom and power of the supermind.
He actually says the supermind begins where the ordinary mind ends. It's like stepping out of that crowded, noisy room and into a peaceful sanctuary where we can finally hear our own inner voice.
And it's in that space of stillness, of silence, that we can tap into what he calls the effortless way of the supermind.
Right. He emphasizes that living from the supermind isn't about striving or forcing things to happen. It's about aligning with the natural flow of life.
It's about trusting that everything is unfolding as it should.
Exactly. He has this great line where he says, everything from a cosmic viewpoint is truly all right.
It's a reminder to let go of our need to control, to surrender to something bigger than ourselves.
And to trust that even amidst challenges and uncertainties, there's a deeper order at play.
So it's not about denying the reality of challenges or difficulties, but about approaching them with a different perspective.
Right. It's about recognizing that those challenges are often opportunities for growth.
And that even in the midst of difficulty, there's a deeper truth, a deeper wisdom that can guide us.
Exactly. And that's really what the supermind is all about. It's about connecting with that deeper wisdom, that inner strength that allows us to navigate the challenges of life with grace and resilience.
I love that. So it's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully ourselves. It's
Exactly.
about uncovering that potential that's already within us.
And using it to create a life that's truly aligned with who we are. It's about uncovering that potential that's already within us and using it to create a life that's truly aligned with who we are.
I love that. So much of what we've talked about so far has really emphasized this idea of looking inward, really cultivating that inner world.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how these supermind principles apply to our interactions with others. Because let's face it, relationships can be tricky.
Oh, absolutely. Relationships can be one of the most challenging aspects of life. But Howard offers some really insightful guidance for navigating the complexities of human relations. He encourages us to see our interactions with others as opportunities for growth,
Even the difficult ones.
especially the difficult ones. He suggests that by paying attention to our reactions to others, we can learn a lot about ourselves.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like using those interactions as mirrors.
Exactly. To reflect back to us our own patterns, our beliefs, our areas for growth. He actually says in the realm of social contacts, you should be so receptive that every contact with another person reveals something new about yourself.
So it's almost like every interaction is a chance for self-discovery.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he challenges us to be honest with ourselves about the nature of our relationships, to recognize when we might be sacrificing our own integrity or becoming emotionally dependent on others.
That's tough to admit sometimes.
It is, but it's essential for growth. He actually has a whole section called Why Friendships Fail, acknowledging that not all relationships are healthy or supportive.
Yeah. Sometimes letting go is the healthiest thing you can do.
Absolutely. And he goes even further. He says, be independent of others.
Independent of others. What does that even look like in practice?
Well, he's not suggesting that we isolate ourselves or become hermits. It's more about cultivating a sense of self-reliance and inner strength, not relying on other people to define our worth or happiness.
So it's about finding that validation from within.
Exactly. And he has this great line. He says, no one can possibly hurt.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
It is. It's about recognizing that our emotional well-being ultimately depends on our own inner state, not on the actions or opinions of others.
So we have more control over our happiness than we realize.
We absolutely do. And he encourages us to step into that power, to recognize that true freedom comes from within, not from anything outside of ourselves.
So it's not about other people behaving in a certain way.
Exactly. It's about choosing our own response, regardless of external circumstances.
And that brings us back to that idea of receptivity, right?
Yes, being open to new perspectives.
Even when those perspectives might challenge our own.
Exactly. And, he also encourages us to see even the most challenging people in our lives as
Oh, I
teachers.
love that idea.
He actually says, the best teachers are those who are the worst off the unkind people, who are negative, complaining, talkative, boastful.
So it's like they're showing us what not to do.
Exactly. They're holding up a mirror to our own potential pitfalls. And by observing their behavior and our reactions to it, we can learn valuable lessons about ourselves.
Like turning those negative interactions into opportunities for growth.
Precisely. And he suggests that this is all part of cultivating our supermind. It's about using every experience, even the difficult ones, to learn and grow and become more fully ourselves.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about something else. Howard talks about the power of silence.
Ah, yes. The Power of Silence, one of
Yeah.
my favorite chapters.
I think a lot of people struggle with silence. We're so used to constant stimulation these days, our phones, the news, social media. It's like we're afraid to be alone with our own thoughts.
It's true. But Howard argues that it's in those moments of stillness, when we quiet the noise of the world and the chatter of our own minds, that we can truly connect with the wisdom and power of the supermind.
It's like hitting the pause button on life.
Exactly. And allowing ourselves to just be, to simply exist without all the distractions.
He actually says the supermind begins where the ordinary mind ends. It's like stepping out of that crowded, noisy room and into a peaceful sanctuary where we can finally hear our own inner voice.
And in our fast-paced, always connected world, silence can be a radical act.
It's like a form of resistance.
It is. It's about reclaiming our attention, our energy, our inner peace. And it's essential for cultivating our supermind.
So how do we actually make space for silence in our lives?
Well, it starts with making a conscious choice. Setting aside even just a few minutes each day to disconnect from the external world and tune into our inner world.
That could be through meditation or mindfulness practices.
Exactly. Or simply sitting in nature listening to calming music. Whatever works for you. The important thing is to make it a regular practice.
And to be patient with ourselves.
Yeah.
It takes time to quiet the mind. It's like training a muscle.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the easier it becomes. And the more we'll experience the benefits, the peace, the clarity, the sense of connection.
It's like we're creating space for the supermind to emerge.
Precisely. And that's where the real magic happens.
What I find so fascinating about Howard's approach is that he doesn't present the supermind as something we have to achieve or earn.
Right. It's not like we have to go through all these complicated rituals or practices to access it.
It's more like it's already there within us.
Exactly. It's our true nature, our inherent potential just waiting to be uncovered.
He uses the analogy of a diamond hidden in a coal mine. The diamond has always been there, but it takes effort and intention to unearth it.
I love that analogy because it highlights that the supermind isn't something foreign or external to us. It's already a part of who we are.
It's like we're polishing away the rough edges to reveal the brilliance within.
Precisely. And he emphasizes that this process of revealing our supermind isn't about becoming someone else.
It's about becoming more fully ourselves.
Exactly. It's about shedding those layers of conditioning, those limiting beliefs, those fears and doubts that are preventing us from shining our brightest.
And he encourages us to live to please ourselves.
Yes. Not in a selfish way, but in the sense of making choices that are aligned with our true nature rather than seeking external validation or trying to live up to other people's expectations.
It's about honoring our own unique path.
Precisely. And trusting that we know what's best for ourselves.
He actually says, anything you get from another human being that requires a sacrifice of your integrity is not worth getting,
It's a powerful reminder to stay true to ourselves,
even when it might mean disappointing others.
even when it's hard. And he also reminds us that no one can truly hurt us unless we give them the power to do so. He says no one can possibly hurt.
That's such a liberating idea.
It is. It's about recognizing that our emotional well-being ultimately depends on our own inner state, not on the actions or opinions of others.
So we have more control over our happiness than we realize.
We absolutely do. And he encourages us to step into that power, to recognize that true freedom comes from within.
I love that. Yeah. So much of what we've been talking about today really circles back to this idea of personal responsibility, right?
Yes, taking ownership of our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, and ultimately our lives.
And recognizing that we have the power to create the reality we desire.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a victim mentality to a creator mentality.
And that's a powerful shift.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're not at the mercy of external circumstances
We have the power to choose our response.
and to create a life that's aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
I think that's a really inspiring message.
It is. It's a message of hope and empowerment. And it's a message that's available to all of us.
Now, I know we've been talking a lot about the inner world and the importance of cultivating our supermind,
Yeah.
but I'm curious how these principles apply to the outer world, to our everyday lives.
Well, Howard argues that when we change our inner world, our outer world naturally reflects that transformation.
It's like the saying, as within, so without.
Exactly. And he encourages us to view the world not as a source of threat or dissatisfaction, but as a mirror reflecting back to us our own beliefs and perceptions.
So if we want to change our experience of the world,
We need to start by changing our inner world.
that makes a lot of sense.
Eh.
So what are some practical ways we can do that?
Well, one of the most powerful tools is right thinking. Choosing thoughts that are aligned with our supermind.
So it's not just about positive thinking.
No, it's deeper than that. It's about recognizing that our thoughts create our reality.
And choosing thoughts that are aligned with the reality we want to create.
Exactly. He emphasizes the importance of questioning our assumptions, challenging our limiting beliefs, and replacing negative thoughts with empowering ones.
And he also talks a lot about the importance of effortless action, right? This idea that when we're aligned with our supermind, things seem to flow effortlessly.
Yes. He uses the analogy of a ship sailing with the wind. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of the universe, things seem to fall into place effortlessly. We don't have to struggle or force things to happen.
So it's about letting go of that need for control and trusting that the universe has our back.
Exactly. And he provides some concrete steps for aligning with this effortless action, like setting clear intentions, letting go of the need to control outcomes, and trusting the timing of the universe.
So it's not about being passive. It's about taking inspired action.
Precisely. It's about being in alignment with our purpose and allowing the universe to support us in fulfilling that purpose.
It's a beautiful way to look at it. And it makes me think about something else. Howard talks about finding pleasure in our human relations. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth revisiting. How does he suggest we apply these supermind principles to our relationships?
Well, he encourages us to approach our relationships with a sense of curiosity and openness, recognizing that everyone, even those who might seem difficult or unpleasant, has something to teach us.
It's like the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Exactly. And he suggests that by cultivating this attitude of receptivity and understanding, we can transform our relationships from sources of stress and conflict into opportunities for growth and connection.
So it's about seeing the good in others even when it's hard to see,
Precisely. And recognizing that everyone is on their own journey.
and that we can learn from each other's experiences.
Exactly. He also talks about the importance of being independent of others, not in the sense of isolating ourselves, but in the sense of not relying on other people to define our worth or happiness.
So it's about finding that validation from within.
Exactly. He actually says, be independent of others, encouraging us to cultivate a sense of self-reliance and inner strength rather than relying on others to define our worth or happiness.
And I think that's especially important in romantic relationships.
It is, because when we're overly dependent on our partners for our happiness,
It can create an unhealthy dynamic.
exactly, and it can actually prevent us from experiencing true intimacy.
So it's about finding that balance between connection and independence.
Precisely. And recognizing that we're all ultimately responsible for our own happiness.
And he also encourages us to be discerning in our relationships
Yes, to recognize that not all relationships are healthy or supportive.
and to have the courage to walk away from relationships that are no longer serving us.
Absolutely. He actually says, why friendships fail, acknowledging that sometimes it's necessary to let go of relationships that no longer serve us.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose the people we surround ourselves with.
And to create relationships that are based on mutual respect, support, and understanding.
I think that's so important. We often feel obligated to stay in relationships that are no longer serving us
But Howard reminds us that we have the right to choose the people who are in our lives.
and to create a life that's filled with love and joy and connection.
Exactly. And that's really what the Supermind is all about. It's about creating a life that's aligned with our highest good. and that brings us true and lasting happiness. And that's really what the supermind is all about. It's about creating a life that's aligned with our highest good and that brings us true and lasting happiness.
Speaking of true and lasting happiness, I think it's worth circling back to something we touched on earlier, this idea of finding pleasure in our human relations. How can we actually apply these supermind principles to our relationships? Because, let's be real, relationships can be complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Relationships can be a source of great joy, but they can also be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, and it's easy to get caught up in those challenges,
Yeah.
to focus on the negative aspects of our relationship.
Right. But Howard encourages us to shift our perspective. He suggests that we approach our relationships with a sense of curiosity and openness, recognizing that everyone, even those who might seem difficult or unpleasant, has something to teach us.
It's like that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Exactly. And he suggests that by cultivating this attitude of receptivity and understanding, we can transform our relationships from sources of stress and conflict into opportunities for growth and connection.
So it's about seeing the good in others, even when it's hard to see.
Precisely. And recognizing that everyone is on their own journey. We all have our own struggles, our own wounds, our own ways of coping. And when we can approach each other with compassion and understanding, it creates a space for healing and growth.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And Howard also talks about the importance of being independent of others, not in the sense of isolating ourselves, but in the sense of not relying on other people to define our worth or happiness.
So it's about finding that validation from within.
Exactly. He actually says, be independent of others, encouraging us to cultivate a sense of self-reliance and inner strength rather than relying on others to define our worth or happiness.
And I think that's especially important in romantic relationships.
It is, because when we're overly dependent on our partners for our happiness, it can create an unhealthy dynamic.
It can create a sense of neediness and clinginess, which can actually push our partners away.
Exactly. And it can prevent us from experiencing true intimacy, which is about connecting with another person from a place of wholeness and authenticity.
So it's about finding that balance between connection and independence.
Precisely. And recognizing that we're all ultimately responsible for our own happiness.
That doesn't mean we can't rely on others for support or that we should isolate ourselves.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing that our happiness doesn't depend on other people behaving in a certain way. We can't control other people. We can only control ourselves.
And he also encourages us to be discerning in our relationships, to recognize that not all relationships are healthy or supportive.
Absolutely. He actually has a chapter called Why Friendships Fail, acknowledging that sometimes it's necessary to let go of relationships that no longer serve us.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose the people we surround ourselves with.
And to create a life that's filled with love, joy, and connection.
I love that. And it brings us back to this idea of personal responsibility, which is really at the heart of Howard's teachings.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership of our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, and ultimately, our lives.
And recognizing that we have the power to create the reality we desire.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a victim mentality to a creator mentality.
And that's a powerful shift.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're not at the mercy of external circumstances. We have the power to choose our response.
And to create a life that's aligned with our deepest values and aspirations.
I think that's a really inspiring message.
It is. It's a message of hope and empowerment, and it's a message that's available to all of us.
Right. It's not reserved for a select few.
Anyone can tap into the power of their supermind.
Exactly. And it starts with making a choice. A choice to wake up, to become more conscious, to create a life that's truly fulfilling.
And Howard provides us with the tools and insights we need to make that choice.
He really does. He offers a practical roadmap for navigating the journey of self-discovery and growth.
And he reminds us that we don't have to do it alone.
We have our own inner wisdom, the support of others, and the guidance of the supermind itself to help us along the way.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring some of the key principles and techniques that Vernon Howard outlines in The Power of Your Supermind.
It's been a fascinating journey.
And it's really just the beginning, isn't it? The real work starts now, when we take these ideas and start applying them to our own lives.
Absolutely. The journey to supermind is an ongoing process of self-discovery, growth, and evolution.